Well, welcome, How listeners, to another How conversation with Chief Joe Bass. This is like a dream come true for me, and I think it will be as well for our listeners for this How conversation on moral leadership. Chief Bass, where are you? And tell us how you're doing before I do an introduction of you and we get into a conversation about moral leadership, which I know our listeners will truly appreciate.
Absolutely. Well, greetings to all of the listeners. Very excited to spend some time with you, General, and Doctor, and all the things. I'm equally excited to spend time with you. I am hailing from Northern Virginia. As many of the folks know, I retired from the Pentagon last year, and we had our youngest still living with us who wanted to go to school here in Northern Virginia. So we decided to make Northern Virginia home. So saying hello and greetings from the National Capital Region.
You can call me Dana. I'll call you Joe for the
Okay.
purposes, if that's okay. Served as the advisor to the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, and also, ultimately to the Secretary of the Air Force on all issues regarding welfare, readiness, morale, and proper utilization and progress of more than 600,000 young people and our total Air Force, which includes our civilian and our military. 19th Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force from 2020 to 2024. First woman, first Asian American to hold this position. We are so proud of you. Not an easy journey. I know you're going to share some of that with us. Our founder and chair, Dov Seidman, very grateful for you being on this journey with us. You stood up and shared such a wonderful pause moment with us in the summit in December. And so I know our listeners are in for a treat. So let me just say welcome again and pop our first question to keep things going in terms of your journey and who influenced you and who mentored you early in your career that helped shape your moral leadership framework.
Absolutely. First, Dana, if I can just say, it really is. I have to pause for a minute to just say how appreciative I am to spend a little bit of time with you all, especially when it comes to moral leadership, which in my mind is hand in hand, and it's just leadership. I have to first just give some respect to and honor to my parents. As you mentioned, I'm an Army brat, so I grew up in an Army household with a dad who had very humble beginnings himself, and a mom who had humble beginnings. My mom came from Korea, so she was an immigrant coming here. Just two people who I watched them throughout my life, especially in my childhood, just work hard and treat people right. And so learning a bit of that moral framework from them was, I think, key to laying a strong foundation in who I was. Even though I was a chucklehead as a teenager, like many of us are, the framework was there. And the values that they gave me very much shaped who I am. Now, fast forward to joining the Air Force and being kind of that, knucklehead 18-year-old, 19-year-old. I'll tell you who was very impressionable to me were my very first supervisors, my very first bosses who gave me standards right off the bat to help me become a better me. And all of them kind of imparted seeds on me. But the last person that I have to talk about, which is most critical, and I don't give them enough credit, is my Army husband, Ron Bass. He served in the Army for 27 years, retired as an Army First Sergeant, a way better leader than I'll ever be, but I don't tell him that. But he taught me early in my military career some really valuable lessons like, yeah, quit taking things personally, shake the dust off, take the hard left, not the easy right. And so, all of these lessons he taught me ultimately really kind of in formative years, formative leadership years, helped guide me to the leader that ultimately I would become.
You actually mentioned in one interview, and I want to bring this into the conversation as well, that you actually just were going to stay in the Air Force long enough to pay off your Honda Civic, which sounds very transactional. But then, you found your purpose, and the rest is history. And purpose is one of our four pillars of moral leadership. And so, what were the moments within these years that kind of helped you find your purpose? And what advice do you have for those early in their careers who may feel like they're lacking that sense of purpose? Maybe they are just trying to pay off the Honda Civic.
Yeah. Yeah. I will say that my experience was that my purpose evolved. And so to those who don't perhaps know what they should be doing, or they feel like they're kind of in this cycle, I would say it's okay. Like, give yourself some grace, right? But for me, my purpose evolved. My purpose for joining the Air Force initially was to get a GI Bill and to figure out life, right? That was why I initially started. And then at the 4-year mark, to your point, I only re-enlisted to pay off a Honda Civic. And then it was an 8-year mark that I actually really joined the Air Force after. And when my purpose evolved, and that was really after I had been in organizations with some great human beings who helped grow me and develop me, and they didn't even realize it, but they also had the strongest of missions. And I started to learn that service is more than a GI Bill. Service is more than a Honda Civic, but it really is, what can you give back? And so again, my purpose has evolved some, and that's just part of life. So give yourself grace, but it will be your purpose that keeps you going in life, because all of us have challenges. When I look back at my 31-year career, there were absolutely times where I was like, I'm done, like, I'm good, and maybe I'll tap out. But when you really do stay focused on that purpose, you don't let distractions derail you from that.
There are some ups and downs, some zigs and zags. And so we'll transition into, life is not linear. And are there particular zigs and zags in your journey that maybe at the time felt like you were going off of your course, or not losing, focus on your purpose? And looking back, how it played a significant role in your journey and what you learned through those times?
One was you don't always get to choose who's on your team, right? Like, and certainly throughout my entire career, I served with people that I deeply admired and loved. And then there's times, like, I'm just going to be real, where you're working with somebody and like they're a jerk and you don't want to work, right? And that was very far and few between. But when you are personally, living your life, and the people closest to you in the work area are not very nice, or they make it really tough, you have decision points. And so there was a point where I was like, okay, I don't know that I want to keep serving in the Air Force. But what I learned is, and I've learned this, and I share this with people all the time, most people don't quit their job, they quit their boss. And so I had to learn that, again, this is one of those growth opportunities where I'm not going to allow myself to be derailed, because I have purpose. And so I'm not going to let this zigzag of being being tied to somebody who we just can't see eye to eye derail me from that purpose. So I would say that was, there were just, again, far and few between, but they were significant at the time.
I had to kind of pause for a moment when you talked about, the phrase of, gosh, they're a jerk. How many of us have that thought process, right? We don't want to be that person. And then I read a book called Your Inner Jerk, and it's like, whoa, are there times where, maybe we feel that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or that we are that, right? Like, so that's where, I'm big now in this chapter of my life of one, give others grace, and two, I need grace, because I'm sure that if you ask, friends, colleagues, my kids, right, they're probably like, she's a jerk sometimes. But again, it's just life for all people.
I would like to transition now to your being a first, right? You've had many first, and I mentioned earlier in the introduction your first female, Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force and first Asian American, and that's a lot to thrust into the public eye, right, for you. So, as a leader with the attention squarely on you, how did you adjust or adapt your leadership with that spotlight? And how do you create, apply a framework and align your values to lead through tough decisions when you are so public facing?
Yeah. It's interesting. If I can just reflect a bit on the thrust into kind of, the public eye. It was really interesting because I would offer that I wasn't in the public eye until my last assignment with the military, right? Before then, I was just a chief who happened to be a command chief and happened to serve, in some really great organizations. When I got selected and named as the Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force, serving with at the time General CQ Brown. Um, it was overnight that I was thrust into the public eye, because the Air Force obviously made their announcement, and then national media outlets started making their announcements. Um, out Media in Hawaii, because that's my home of record, started making announcements, and that was the first time, Dana, ever that I had been associated with labels to some degree also of being a first female and a first Asian American. And the reason why I share that is I had to learn how to navigate what that meant, because I'd never walked around as I'm a female chief or I'm a female airman or whatever, right? You're just part of the team doing what the team does. But when you're in the public eye, it becomes a thing. And so what I had to learn from all of that and how I navigated some of those things is still staying true and staying grounded to what led me to being selected in that position, which is, the competencies that I had, the direction that General Brown wanted to take the organization, and just stay focused. And that's why I always tell people that, I remind others and I remind myself, like, you can't let distractions come in the way. And so again, staying pretty focused on what is it that we need the United States Air Force to do for our nation, and how can I make sure that, which by the way, that's the main thing. How do I make sure I keep the main thing and not let other things distract me? What was, something that was really important to me in the seat. But the one thing that I will also say is it wasn't lost on me, though, that I was a first. And because of that, I knew that I had to continue, and this ties back to your first question with me. I had to continue in kind of the challenge that my parents gave me so long ago, which is, work hard, do the right thing, treat people well, and your competencies and your confidence and your commitment will ultimately lead you to success.
You're such grace in motion that it's not unusual. You took that into that public facing space and place. You did that as well with us, as I mentioned to our listeners at the House Summit, where you had a wonderful segment on the pause and specifically helping us to reconnect with the how we do things, and also, reconnecting with each other, with family, with loved ones. How do we go about doing that? And you mentioned in the past the importance of caring for ourselves and the physical, spiritual, mental, and social aspects. So my question is along the lines of, how do you foster a culture that is large as an institution like the Air Force, 600,000 people? How do you foster that kind of a culture of the pause and the taking care and connecting?
Yeah, the one thing that I think the military does really brilliantly is we create frameworks. And some of those frameworks are really focused on the resilience of the force. And I'll never forget, it's been, certainly the focus on resilience of the force was there when I joined the Air Force 31 years ago. And I'll never forget sitting in on a training session where they talked about the four pillars of resilience, which were physical, social, spiritual, and mental pillars. So here I am as a young 21-year-old listening to this training session, and perhaps it didn't click at the time, but as I continued serving, it did. Because what I learned is that if you'll focus on those pillars as if they're pillars to a house, your house can only be strong if those pillars are even and strong in their foundation. And so what I've learned for myself and what we've shared broadly across the Air Force is that we need you to be strong. And the only way that you can do that is if you take care of yourself in all four of those aspects. I would also offer financial responsibility and fiscal resilience is important too. And so it was important to me to try to hold myself accountable to those four pillars and also to have teammates around me where we would hold each other accountable to those things because life happens.
So during your time in the Air Force, you were dealing with a lot of different stakeholders, very diverse, navigating a lot of very sensitive relationships. And we have a term at the Howe Institute we talk about, which is probably common practice for you, but establishing that moral muscle to stay on the course despite influence from many different sources, being pulled in many different directions. How do you balance or integrate a collaborative environment, in this kind of almost a paradoxical pull where you're being torn? How do you stay on course in your moral leadership journey?
Staying grounded, regardless of whatever position you're in, but staying grounded and kind of who you are very much matters. And so for me, I would always remind myself and kind of recenter myself based on kind of some of the first principles that I have for myself, as well as, my family. When we took this last assignment at the Pentagon, I remember driving from Mississippi to DC, and I'm in one car, my husband's in another car, and we had the discussion, how do we stay grounded? And how do we make sure that we fortify our family so that we can still be just as strong as we finish this up? And so how did I deal with all the stakeholders that are in the Pentagon and outside of the Pentagon and in Congress and the public? It went back to those first principles of making sure that we don't get distracted from what's at hand. New information will always come. We prepare ourselves to understand the environments to which we serve in an organization, and we change, but we don't, again, let ourselves get distracted. And that means we have to be deliberate again about our time, and deliberate about what we feed ourselves. And so I had to learn early on, right? Whatever I feed myself, if it's good, then the output is going to be good. And so I would feed myself, books that were helpful to me in the role that I had. I would feed myself podcasts. I got an executive coach, again, just different things to help me hold myself accountable so that as I showed up to be my best, as I interacted and connected with stakeholders of all kinds, it was really that grounding piece that would allow me to be successful in the job that I had to do.
So, given that and acknowledging that, there must be, in your experience, a time when you were pulled, torn. In this divisive world, many people are feeling like they can easily be taken off course. What do you use as a guide in your decision? What sustains you in navigating that paradox or that pull? And how do you go about communicating how you made that decision, knowing that when it's an either or, right? Somebody's not going to be happy.
I know this seems really simplistic, Dana, but I'll be honest, we've all grown up and we've heard the term, like, you've got to be able to look at yourself in the mirror. But that really is as simple as it is. I've got to look at myself in the mirror. And so if I can go to bed at night knowing that I made the best decisions based on the information that I had, then I'm, and with the input of many of the other stakeholders, then I'm good with that. I'll share one example of that was a few years back that really did have me torn. And for your military folks, they'll understand and appreciate, but it was during a discussion amongst promotion rates. And in the Air Force at that time, a few years back, when you look at our enlisted force and primarily our non-commissioned officers, E5s and E6s, we had, quite frankly, for the last probably dozens, 15 to 10 years, 10 to 15 years back, really had very high promotion rates. And because of that, we were inflated at the NCO level. And so you're balancing what's good for the organization and, kind of what's good for the person. And so that was really, it sat with me for a while. And by the way, I never make decisions that have major implications fast. We actually pause on those decisions because they have real life human implications that impact the person and their families. So we sat on this, and again, we're balancing kind of current event situation, what's best for the organization. And we knew, though, if we continue to kick the can down the road, that it would make it worse for the person who came after me. And so we also know that we don't kick the can down the road because as leaders, we're paid to make the hard decisions. And again, that was another one where it's not going to please everybody. But I've got to look at myself in the mirror and know that we did the best that we could.
You had to give your advice to yourself as you were beginning this amazing trailblazing career. And I know it's still ongoing. There's no such thing as retirement. It's just a reshaping your contributions right in the future. Yeah. What would you say to your younger self and advice for beginning leadership journey now?
Quit taking yourself so seriously. There were times where I felt like I probably didn't have as much fun because I was so serious about stuff, right? Like, and that's great, right? Like that, ultimately it led me to who I am. But I would say, like, just enjoy sometimes the present and don't take yourself so seriously, like have fun. The other thing that I would tell myself is never burn a bridge. And that is probably good advice for anybody in any situation, any organization. The reality is our world is small and we are going to come across people again. And so you don't have to burn the bridge. Maybe you just don't walk across it, but never burn a bridge because you never know when you're going to need to make that connection again.
Wonderfully said. And what is burning a bridge? If I can, I think we all kind of think we know what that means. But to you, when you think of burning a bridge, what does that look like?
What Dana, I speak from experience because there were bridges that I burned, right? Like there were times in my career, especially when I was more junior, where I felt like what I was doing was right and I knew what was right. And by golly, I'm going to win this discussion or argument or whatever it is. And I would make people not very happy around me. And so I just learned, right? I mean, that's, you can be forceful and sometimes there's a time and a place, but we don't always have to win, and just be thoughtful in how we cross that bridge, right? Like, is there a way to do it where you don't turn everybody off? And is there a way to say something that you don't hurt somebody to their core that they never want to connect with you again?
Yeah, and I hear you giving advice is it's best not to burn the bridge or create the disconnection in the first place because it's harder to rebuild. And that's true of trust, and I think that's true of a lot of things. I think my last question gets at one of those things that's important to us is hope. And, what is it that is giving you hope in this day and age? Obviously, we're supposed to be purveyors of hopes as moral leaders. How do you I guess, give hope during these times.
You just said what you said about purveyors of hope. I tell people all the time, if you're a leader, then you're a dealer of hope. And people are looking to us for that. But what gives me hope is this next generation. Specifically, I have two daughters that are 18 and 24-year-olds, and every time I talk with them, I'm like, we need you to make sure that you're watching and learning about what's happening in history so you can continue to, do your part in this great thing called life. And to your daughter, Dana, it's this generation who's coming after us who give me hope that they're watching and learning in a very complex time where technology is hitting us faster than we can even keep up. I am convinced that this generation is going to be ready to take on the mantle and lead us well.
Fantastic message. Thank you so much. Thank you to our listeners for this How conversation on moral leadership. We hope that you're elevated and inspired and that you will go help be wave makers for us and for all of us to elevate humanity.
Thanks for having me, Dana.